In the previous episode, we followed Pharaoh Menkaure, builder of the smallest of the three Great Pyramids at Giza. When he died, however, his funerary complex was still unfinished and it fell to his successor, Shepseskaf, to complete the king's final monument. But after honoring his predecessor, Shepseskaf made a remarkable decision. When it came time to build his own royal tomb, he abandoned the pyramid altogether. You are standing in the desert south of Saqqara, the mid-morning sun already brutal against the sand. Ahead of you sits a massive shape that simply does not belong here. It looks like a giant coffin left to bake in the heat for 4,500 years. The limestone sides slope inward, pulling your eyes down to the ground. There is no sharp point reaching for the sky, and no smooth triangular face catching the sun. This is the tomb of Pharaoh Shepseskaf. Instead of the towering designs of his predecessors, he actively chose this earthbound rectangular shape, a structure crouched against the horizon, like it is trying not to be seen for 3 generations. The pyramid was the essential requirement for a king, by choosing a different path. Shepseskaf broke with the singular tradition that defined the royal afterlife. To understand his choice, you have to look at what Shepseskaf inherited just 20 kilometers north at Giza. Sat the monuments of his grandfather Khufu and his uncle Khafre. Look at the size of these blocks compared to the people at the base. Khufu built the tallest structure human hands had ever made. These monuments had a strict theological purpose. A pyramid was a functional stairway. It provided the exact physical path a dead king needed to climb toward Ra, the sun god, and become a star in the night sky. Maintaining that path to the sky required an entire civilization's worth of resources. You need quarry crews, transport boats, and lush irrigated agricultural fields along the Nile to feed an army of thousands of workers bread and beer every single day for decades. His ancestors demanded towering ambition. Shepseskaf himself built a flat, heavy rectangle that hides in the desert profile. Inheriting a kingdom stretched thin by 3 massive projects forced a new ruler to find a sustainable way to represent his power, even if it meant abandoning the mountain of stone his ancestors expected. For a long time, the simplest explanation was that this tomb was a budget. Shortcut in 1924, when a Swiss archaeologist named Gaston de Quay began excavating the site, locals called it the Bench of the Pharaoh. Many assumed it was a simplified non-Goyal structure. Then J.K.'s team broke through into the subterranean layout. This image shows the deep square-cut architectural precision of the interior, which perfectly matched the highly secure pyramid logic of the Old Kingdom. The interior included a descending corridor, specific storage magazines for offerings, and massive sliding granite portcullis doors. This was the exact same security system used to protect the giant pyramids at Giza from tomb robbers. Installing those internal security blocks required immense effort. Workers had to quarry massive slabs of raw granite like this far south at Aswan and float them down the river. The subterranean complex required the same massive labor force and long-distance supply chains as a traditional pyramid. Because the interior was so heavily fortified and expensive, the exterior shape was a deliberate choice, not a quick, cheap alternative. Shepseskaf spent pyramid-level resources on the inside of his tomb. Therefore, his refusal to build a pyramid on the outside was a calculated political or religious message. Historians are split on what that message actually meant. The first theory focuses on the treasury after 3 generations of massive pyramid building. The kingdom's wealth and labor were severely strained. We can see physical evidence of this economic crisis at Giza. This shows the ruined foundation of his father's funeral temple, sitting in the shadow of the distant pyramids when Shepseskaf took the throne. This was unfinished. He was forced to complete it in a hurry, using cheap mud brick instead of fine limestone. The second theory suggests the choice had nothing to do with money. The Mastaba shape was the original tomb style of Egypt's earliest kings. By returning to it, Shepseskaf may have been pushing back against the encroaching political power of the Ra sun cult, whose priests were starting to rival the king himself. Whichever crisis he was facing, he had very little time to solve. Records suggest his reign lasted only about 4 years. He had to make rapid, definitive decisions. A 4-year window turns every architectural choice into a high-stakes balancing act. Shepseskaf had to somehow survive potential economic ruin, fight off a rival priesthood, and finish his tomb before his own clock ran out. Whatever statement Shepseskaf was trying to make, it did not last when he dies. The Fourth Dynasty family line effectively ends. A new king named Userkaf rises to power. Userkaf abandons the Mastaba design entirely. He and the subsequent kings of the Fifth Dynasty go straight back to building pyramids. As this diagram shows, Userkaf goes even further. He constructs enormous open-air sun temples entirely separate from his tomb to cement the absolute power of the cult of Ra. The swift return to pyramids and sun temples suggests that Shepseskaf's choice was an exception rather than a turning point. The traditional connection between the pharaoh and the sun god remained the dominant force in Egyptian state religion. Because ancient king lists are damaged and 4,000 years of time have erased the context, the physical evidence remains incomplete. Archaeologists still debate the true motive. Nobody knows for sure whether this flat stone monument was born from an empty treasury or a deliberate religious break. His name survived in the official king lists. For 1,000 years, he is remembered as a legitimate ruler who fulfilled the duties of the throne, completing both his father's temple and his own monument within the constraints he was given. It leaves us with a profound question: is true power defined by reaching for the sky with borrowed resources, or by standing firmly on the ground with what you actually have? Shepseskaf ruled for only a few years, yet his reign remains one of the most intriguing chapters of the Old Kingdom. He completed the unfinished funerary complex of his father, chose a monument unlike any other king of the Fourth Dynasty, and stood at the turning point between two eras of Egyptian history. But his story raises even more fascinating questions. Was he the last ruler to challenge the growing influence of the cult of Ra? Did his unusual tomb reflect economic reality, religious conviction, or a political message that has been lost to time? And perhaps most importantly, why did the kings who came after him immediately return to building pyramids while also creating enormous sun temples dedicated to Ra? Those questions lead directly into the beginning of Egypt's Fifth Dynasty, where royal power, religion, and monument building would all take a dramatic new direction. If you enjoy evidence-based explorations of ancient Egypt that separate archaeological facts from speculation, consider subscribing. There are many more forgotten pharaohs, unfinished monuments, and historical mysteries still waiting to be uncovered.